My name is Haley. I'm 56 years old. And last month, my daughter looked me in the eye and said I didn't fit her wedding. I thought the words were the worst part, until she took the cottage I spent my whole life paying for. I'm still trying to understand how we reached this point, but it all started with a moment I never expected. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe for more stories about family drama, betrayal, and emotional courage. I still remember the exact sound the gravel made under my shoes that night. It was a sharp, crunching noise, too loud for a driveway I'd walked on every single day for years. Something about it felt wrong, out of place, like the earth itself was trying to warn me before my eyes caught up. The sky was already dark by the time I reached our small trailer, and the air carried that heavy, damp smell that comes before rain. I'd just finished my third shift of the day and was heading into my fourth, the kind where I'd clean up, make dinner, and try to get a few hours of sleep before doing it all again. My body was tired, but it was the kind of tired I'd grown used to, the kind you stop complaining about because it becomes part of your normal rhythm. I reached for the door handle, expecting the usual: the glow of the small lamp near the couch, the faint hum of the old fridge, maybe even the TV with the volume a little too loud because my parents always pretended they didn't hear as well as they used to. But when I pushed the door open, the inside of the trailer greeted me with something I had never seen there before. Absolute darkness. Not the cozy kind. Not the we went to sleep early kind. This was different. This darkness felt hollow, empty, too still. I clicked the switch on the wall. Nothing happened. The power was out, but we had paid the last bill. I had paid the last bill. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust while a strange, cold feeling spread through my chest, something between confusion and a whisper of fear. I stepped forward, guided only by the faint moonlight slipping through the blinds. The floor felt gritty under my shoes, like someone had walked through in a hurry and tracked in dirt. I kicked something metallic by accident, and it rolled across the floor with a hollow tapping sound. When I bent down to see what it was, my heart dropped. It was my dad's pocket knife, the one he kept clipped onto his jeans every single day for as long as I could remember. He never left it behind. Ever. That was the first real sign something was terribly wrong. I called out softly at first, "Mom." No answer. "Dad." Only silence. Not the silence of people sleeping. Not the silence of people in the backyard. The silence of an empty home. I walked into the kitchen, and that's when I sensed the second shift in the air, like someone had left in a hurry but tried to pretend everything was normal. The fridge door was slightly open, and the light inside gave me enough brightness to see that the shelves were almost completely bare. Only a jar of mustard and an expired container of sour cream sat inside. I frowned, turning toward the counter where we usually kept spare grocery bags, coupons, and whatever mail we forgot to open. Tonight, the space was nearly spotless. Too spotless. The usual pile of papers, wrappers, and small messes was gone. My footsteps took me to the bedroom hallway, where the air felt colder, as if someone had opened a window earlier and never closed it properly. A faint breeze brushed past me, bringing with it a smell I didn't associate with my home, something like stale cigarette smoke mixed with cheap car freshener. I opened my parents' bedroom door and froze. Drawers pulled out. Clothes missing. Shoes gone. The closet looked like a clothing store after a clearance sale, empty hangers rattling slightly as the breeze moved them. The blankets on the bed were left in a messy heap, like someone sat there debating one last thing before leaving. I took one step inside and felt something crinkle under my sock. I leaned down and picked it up, a torn piece of paper. My hands shook when I realized what it was: a torn portion of a lottery check stub. The logo was unmistakable, bold, bright, the same one I'd seen on billboards every week on my way home from work. At first, My mind couldn't make sense of it. Why would there be a lottery check stub in our home? My parents didn't play the lottery. They barely believed in buying anything extra, let alone tickets. They didn't trust luck or chance. They trusted me. Or at least that's what I thought. I stood there, staring at the stub, my breath stuck somewhere between my ribs. The numbers printed on, it didn't look small either. My fingers traced the part of the amount that wasn't torn off. $2, and then the rest was missing. It could have been anything. $20, 200, 2,000, or something else entirely. I didn't want to assume the worst. I didn't want to assume anything. But the emptiness of the room, the missing clothes, the dark trailer, the abandoned knife, it all screamed something I wasn't ready to hear. My parents left, and they didn't tell me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking under my weight with a familiar squeak. My breath felt tight, like someone was pressing on my ribs from the inside. I wanted to think maybe they had an emergency. Maybe they went to visit a friend. Maybe they got called out suddenly. But the missing clothes, the empty drawers, the power shut off, the quietness of the place, everything pointed in one direction. They were gone, and they left fast, and whatever they left behind for me, it wasn't a message. It was a mess. I spent the next few minutes searching. The whole trailer became a puzzle I tried to piece together. The living room shelves, books missing. Mom's favorite ceramic mug, gone. Dad's work boots, not in their spot by the door. But the bills were still there, stacked neatly on the table, all in my name. My hands trembled as I lifted the first envelope. Overdue electricity, overdue water, overdue credit card, all opened, all ignored. I felt something inside me stretch thin, almost tear. It didn't make sense. My parents had never been perfect, but they weren't cruel. They weren't careless. They weren't the kind of people to vanish and leave me with everything. Or maybe I had been telling myself that for years, because the truth was too heavy to lift. I moved to the small kitchen table and sat down slowly, feeling the chill of the cold surface seep into my palms. I stared at those envelopes until the words blurred. A strange numbness settled over me, like someone had pulled a curtain down in my mind to protect me from the sharpest edges of what I was feeling. I whispered to the empty room, "Where did you go?" The silence answered me again. But silence isn't always empty. Sometimes silence says everything. I reached for my phone. I called my mom, straight to voicemail. I called my dad. The call didn't even ring. It went directly to a message saying the number was no longer in service. My stomach twisted as my mind searched for explanations. Maybe they changed their number because of scammers. Maybe they turned off their phones because of poor service. Maybe. No, I had to stop lying to myself. It was all right there in front of me. They didn't want to be found. I stood up again. My legs felt unsteady, but I moved to my room anyway, half hoping maybe they'd left me something. Anything. Some note. Some explanation. A clue. A goodbye. But my room was untouched. My things were exactly where I left them. Almost like they hadn't even bothered to step in. That hurt more than I expected. On my nightstand, I found something that pulled my breath from my lungs. A folded receipt from a gas station 2 towns away. The timestamp said 5:47 p.m., the same time I was finishing my shift at the grocery store. The items listed were simple: bottled water, chips, motor oil, and 3 lottery tickets, all purchased with cash. I sat on my bed, holding the receipt, and a strange memory surfaced. One from a few months ago when I came home and saw my dad quietly stuffing something into his pocket while my mom distracted me with questions about dinner. I asked him what he bought, and he laughed it off. Just something small, he'd said. Now it hit me. It wasn't small. It was never small. As the weight of everything fell on me, I buried my face in my hands. Not to cry, but to breathe. Slow, steady breaths. Because in that moment, I felt something almost frightening, a kind of deep, tired ache that didn't come from being abandoned, but from realizing maybe I had been losing them long before they physically walked out. A few minutes passed. I don't know how many, but eventually I got up and grabbed a flashlight from my dresser. I walked back into the hallway and checked the front door again. This time, I noticed something I had missed, a faint smear on the doorframe, like someone's hand brushed it in a hurry. My dad's. It had to be. The realization sent a sting through me, a sharp, unexpected pain that felt like betrayal and grief rolled into one. I walked outside, looking around the yard. The grass was disturbed, and fresh tire marks carved a path toward the road. They must have driven away quickly, maybe before even sunset, maybe just minutes before I came home. I stood there, arms wrapped around myself, feeling the wind pick up. The trees rustled, and a dog barked from a distance. Normal sounds, familiar sounds, but nothing about this night felt familiar anymore. Eventually, I went back inside. I set the flashlight on the kitchen table and pulled out a chair. I sat down, facing the bills, the torn lottery stub, the empty rooms, everything my parents left behind. The more I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't an emergency. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. And it was made carefully enough that they clearly planned it for days, maybe weeks. They waited for the right moment, for me to be gone, for the trailer to be quiet enough to slip away. They didn't want to face me. They didn't want to explain. They didn't want to give me anything, not even the truth. I leaned back in the chair, letting my eyes drift toward the ceiling. A small water stain from last winter stared back at me like a worn-out reminder of all the nights I stayed awake worrying about bills and repairs and how to keep life steady for all of us. Except maybe I was the only one trying. I felt my throat tighten again, but I forced myself to inhale slowly. I needed to think. I needed to stay calm. I needed to figure out what to do next. But before I could form a plan, a small, unexpected sound broke the silence. A soft tapping. I stiffened. Was someone outside? My heart hammered in my chest as I stood up, gripping the flashlight. I stepped toward the door slowly, each step echoing in my ears. When I reached the window and peeked out, I saw nothing but the dim glow of a streetlight and the outline of empty yards. Then the tapping happened again, this time from inside the trailer. I turned sharply. The sound came from the living room, the same spot where I first found the torn lottery stub. I walked closer, scanning the floor, until my eyes caught it. Dad's pocket knife. It had rolled slightly, tapping against a loose metal strip near the vent. Something so small, so simple, but it sent a shiver through me, because that knife had been part of him, a piece of his daily routine, and seeing it left behind, abandoned and alone, felt like a quiet confession they never meant to make. It was the only thing they forgot, or maybe the only thing they didn't bother taking. I picked it up carefully, holding it in both hands. The weight felt heavier than it should. I walked back to the table, placed the knife next to the bills, and stared at everything again, this time with a strange calm settling into my chest. Whatever happened, whatever they did, my life had just changed in a way I never saw coming. And I was standing in the middle of a story that was only beginning. The moment I set the knife down on the table, I felt an odd mixture of emptiness and determination. My parents had vanished, leaving me with a house full of silence, bills, and memories that refused to fade. And yet, there was work to be done. Always work. For as long as I could remember, work had been my constant companion, my anchor in a life that had a habit of throwing storms I wasn't prepared for. I started with the first job, cleaning the diner on Main Street. I had been there for years, the early morning shift my sacred, grueling routine. My fingers still remembered the grooves of the sticky counters, the grease stains that no amount of scrubbing could erase, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with fried eggs that clung to my hair by the end of each shift. It was loud in there, clanging dishes, laughter from regulars, the occasional argument over who got the last slice of pie. But beneath the chaos, there was a rhythm I had perfected over years. I often arrived before the sun had fully risen, dragging my feet down streets that were still quiet, listening to the distant hum of cars and the occasional bark of a dog. I'd greet Mary, the short-order cook, who had worked there longer than I had been alive, with a tired smile. "Morning, Haley," she would say, already flipping bacon with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. I'd nod, not really feeling awake, because I was already thinking about the next job waiting for me after the diner, stacking shelves at the grocery store, my back stiff and hands raw from lifting boxes of canned goods and frozen vegetables. Every day felt like a treadmill I could never step off. But the diner had its moments. I remember one morning when a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, handed me a crumpled dollar and whispered, "I saved this for you." His mother apologized, quietly embarrassed, but I knelt down, smiled, and accepted it anyway. That brief spark of connection, someone acknowledging my effort without judgment, reminded me why I kept going. It wasn't for my parents, not entirely. It was for the fragments of humanity I found in others, tiny and fleeting, yet enough to keep me tethered. By mid-morning, I was already moving to the second job, stocking the grocery store. It wasn't glamorous. Most of the time it was bending, lifting, and arranging items according to some unspoken code that the store manager, Mr. Patel, expected us to follow without question. But I had learned to find patterns in repetition. Boxes that seemed endless could be organized efficiently. And I developed a sense for when someone needed assistance, like an older man struggling with a heavy pack of toilet paper or a young mother juggling a toddler and a shopping list. I would step in, always quietly, because I didn't want thanks. I couldn't afford to linger in recognition. One afternoon, while stacking cereal boxes, I overheard a coworker whispering about a new promotion opportunity. My chest tightened. I wanted it, yes, but the reality hit hard. I couldn't take on more responsibilities that might require extra hours beyond what I already worked. My life had become a balancing act between survival and exhaustion. I had no room for ambition because ambition was a luxury, and luxury wasn't part of my vocabulary. Lunch breaks were rare. Often, I'd grab something quick, a granola bar, a sandwich I'd made at home, eating it in the stockroom while checking my watch obsessively. There was no time for rest. There was only movement, repetition, and the quiet knowledge that at the end of the day, I had to do it all over again. And yet, I learned small lessons along the way, like how the smell of freshly baked bread could momentarily calm the ache in my back, or how a smile from a regular customer could make the hours feel slightly lighter. Then came the third job, babysitting my neighbor's children in the evenings. This was supposed to be the light reprieve, the only job where laughter could replace exhaustion, even if just for a few hours. But kids demanded more than energy. They demanded patience, creativity, attention. I often came home with my hair tangled, pockets full of crayon shavings, and a lingering scent of spilled juice. But I liked the feeling of being needed in a way that was uncomplicated. They didn't owe me anything, yet their trust reminded me of something I had lost in my own household, the uncomplicated expectation of care and warmth. I remember one particular evening vividly. I was kneeling on the living room floor, building a block tower for little Jonah, when he looked up at me with wide eyes and said, "Haley, you're the strongest person I know." The words hit me harder than I expected. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was the first time in weeks someone had seen me not as a servant, a worker, or a child of absentee parents, but as someone capable. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, exhausted, aching, and overworked, yet a child saw strength where I only felt fatigue. Finally, the fourth job, weekend landscaping. This was the one that physically broke me, but somehow fed a part of me that still refused to give up. I'd lift soil, rake leaves, mow lawns under the harsh sun, sweat soaking my clothes, muscles trembling, knees sore. Sometimes, after a full day, I'd collapse on a patch of grass, staring up at the clouds, and let my thoughts wander freely because no one was there to demand more than I could give. It was grounding, brutally physical, but grounding. The landscaping job also brought its share of unexpected encounters. One Saturday, I was clearing debris behind a neighbor's house when Mr. Henry, an elderly man I barely knew, called out from his porch. "Need a hand, young lady?" I waved him off politely, refusing assistance, but he insisted, and eventually we spent the better part of an hour talking as we worked side by side. He never judged my exhaustion or the thinness of my patience. That simple, quiet acknowledgement of effort, human recognition, was rare, and I clung to it, storing it in my memory like a secret treasure. Through all four jobs, there were days when I cried in the bathroom stall at the diner, or on the grocery store floor, or in the quiet moments after the children had gone to bed. I cried because I was exhausted. I cried because I was alone. I cried because, no matter how hard I worked, the weight of my parents' debts, expectations, and now abandonment pressed down on me with no relief. And yet, amidst the exhaustion, small miracles happened. At the diner, a regular customer left me an extra tip, insisting I take it. At the grocery store, an elderly woman brought me homemade cookies, saying they reminded her of her own granddaughter. The children I babysat sometimes left little notes taped to my pockets, scribbled with crayons, thanking me for playing with them. And Henry, the elderly landscaper, quietly observed my effort, acknowledging without words that he saw my persistence and resilience. Each job brought its own challenges, but also its own unexpected joys, lessons, and connections. I learned to read people quickly, anticipate problems before they arose, and find small victories in moments others might overlook. I became adept at masking exhaustion with a smile, even when my shoulders ached and my back screamed for rest. I became skilled at navigating spaces where I felt invisible, yet still mattered in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. But the toll was unmistakable. I lost track of nights that blurred into mornings. I forgot the feel of uninterrupted sleep. I watched relationships drift away because I didn't have the energy to maintain them. Friends grew distant, partners grew frustrated with my schedule, and even my own reflection in the mirror became a stranger I scarcely recognized. My hands bore calluses, my feet ached constantly, and yet I persisted because there was no other option. It wasn't just the physical strain, it was the emotional cost. Each paycheck felt smaller than the effort it represented. Each meal I skipped to save money for bills weighed on me in its absence. Each tired smile I offered to customers, coworkers, and neighbors concealed an exhaustion that ran deeper than muscle fatigue. And as I carried all of it, I began to understand something vital. Surviving wasn't just about enduring. It was about pushing forward even when the world seemed intent on breaking you. I remember the night I realized I had forgotten my own birthday again. I had worked 4 shifts that week, barely eating, barely sleeping, barely noticing the days. When I returned to the trailer that night, I collapsed on the couch, feeling more like a ghost than a human being. The thought that my parents weren't even there to acknowledge my birthday, if they remembered it at all, stung sharply. But in that moment, I also felt a strange clarity. I had survived another week entirely on my own strength, skill, and determination. No one had saved me. No one had given me anything I hadn't earned through sheer persistence. And that persistence was the thing that kept me tethered to life. Not luck, not love, not even the people who were supposed to be there. For me, it was my own hands, my own back, my own willingness to keep going, even when every fiber of my body screamed for rest. Through the years, each job became a chapter in its own story. At the diner, I learned to anticipate needs before they were voiced. At the grocery store, I discovered the quiet satisfaction of organizing chaos. Babysitting taught me patience, creativity, and how to find joy in small victories. Landscaping showed me resilience, endurance, and the unexpected beauty of physical labor. All of it together formed the life I had built for myself, messy, exhausting, but entirely mine to claim. Even now, looking back on that endless rotation of shifts, I can feel the ache in my shoulders and the tension in my back. I can remember the taste of burnt coffee, the smell of fertilizer, the sticky floors, and crayon-stained walls. Every single one of those experiences shaped me, and every single one prepared me, in ways I couldn't yet understand, for the night that followed, the night when I would have to face the reality that my parents had vanished, leaving me alone to carry not only their debts, but the weight of my own existence. I understood, finally, that this wasn't just survival. This was training. Training in endurance, emotional fortitude, and self-reliance. I had no choice but to keep going, because the moment I stopped, the world, and perhaps even my own sense of self, would collapse around me. And so, I rose before dawn, exhausted yet unbroken, and returned to the first job, repeating the rhythm that had carried me this far. Cleaning tables, stacking shelves, playing with children, lifting soil. Day in and day out, hour by hour, shift by shift. My life had become a machine fueled by determination, heartache, and necessity. And yet, within it all, I began to glimpse a deeper truth. I was stronger than I realized. The morning sun felt heavier that day, casting sharp shadows across the yard where I had been raking leaves just the week before. My back still ached from the endless hours of landscaping, and my fingers were raw from lifting tools and shifting soil. But I had learned to push through pain as if it were nothing more than a constant companion. I didn't notice how tense my shoulders were until they tensed even further, almost instinctively, at the sound of someone calling my name in a hurried tone. "Haley, over here." It was Henry, my elderly boss, waving from the porch of the small farmhouse he had tasked me to clean up that morning. He was usually patient, steady, slow to speak, but the way he gestured now, urgency sharp in his eyes, made my chest tighten. Something felt wrong immediately. I dropped the rake and jogged toward him, brushing dirt from my palms. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing knot in my stomach. "It's me," he gasped. I can't breathe. Right. Can you help me?" His words came in short bursts, each one punctuated by a wheeze. I froze for half a second, my mind racing. I had known Henry for years, quiet, measured, unflappable, but never vulnerable like this. The panic hit me fully when I saw him collapse onto the porch steps, clutching at his chest. "Henry!" I shouted, lunging toward him. I caught him just in time, lowering him to the ground gently but firmly. His hands trembled, his grip weak, and for a moment I thought he might slip from my arms entirely. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, and I realized the weight of the moment. This was life or death, and I was all he had. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking as I dialed 911. The operator's calm voice was a strange contrast to the chaos of my thoughts, guiding me through the steps while I tried to keep Henry conscious. I gripped his hand tightly, feeling the faint pulse beneath his skin, every beat a reminder of the fragility of life. "Haley," he whispered between breaths, his voice weak. "I trust you. Don't panic." The words barely made sense, but the conviction behind them was unmistakable. He wasn't trying to reassure me. He was trying to anchor me. The ambulance arrived within what felt like both an eternity and a blink. Paramedics swooped in, assessing him with efficient precision. I stayed close, answering questions, recounting his symptoms, and handing over details about his medical history. Watching them work, I realized how fast life could shift from routine to catastrophic, and how unexpectedly I had been thrown into responsibility I wasn't prepared for. As the ambulance doors closed and Henry was wheeled away, I felt an odd emptiness settle into my chest. The workday I had anticipated, the raking, planting, fixing fences, was gone. In its place was a profound sense of vulnerability, not just for Henry, but for myself. The years of juggling 4 jobs had prepared me for exhaustion, for hardship, for loneliness, but not for being suddenly faced with someone else's life in my hands. I stayed behind, pacing the small yard while trying to steady my thoughts. The wind rustled the trees, scattering a few remaining leaves across the dirt path. Each one seemed to move with a life of its own, mocking me in silence. I felt raw, exposed, and strangely aware of how much my life had been about carrying the burdens of others. First my parents, now Henry. The weight of responsibility had a strange, oppressive rhythm, a beat I could never escape. By late afternoon, I had returned to the house Henry had asked me to prepare, determined to continue my work despite the lingering shock. The phone rang while I was kneeling on the floor, wiping mud from a patch of carpet. I jumped, heart in my throat, and answered to hear a nurse on the line. "Haley, this is Nurse Wilson from St. Mary's. Mr. Cross is stable, but he's requested to speak with you as soon as possible. Can you come by?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll be right there." Driving to the hospital, my mind raced. What had I expected? That he would be angry? That he would scold me for worrying? Or perhaps that he would laugh and tell me I overreacted? None of those felt likely. He trusted me in a way few people ever had. And suddenly, that trust felt like a fragile thread holding both of us up. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and tension. I navigated the quiet hallways, catching glimpses of nurses and patients, some calm, others in visible distress. When I finally reached Henry's room, I saw him propped up against pillows, pale but alert. There was a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen before, a vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the reserved, composed man I had known. "You came," he said, voice hoarse. "Good. I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," I said, though my hands still shook. "Are you?" He gave a faint smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I will be, but there's something I need to tell you." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something. The way he phrased it, careful, measured, hinted at more than just gratitude. I sank into the chair beside his bed, leaning forward. "What is it?" Henry took a deep breath, closing his eyes briefly. "I'm not what people think I am. Most of the town, they assume I'm just a quiet farmer, someone who keeps to himself. But I have more than you realize." I blinked. "I don't understand." "I'm wealthy, Haley," he said. "Finally, I've managed my family's business quietly for years. Investments, properties, assets, most of it. I keep low profile because I want my life simple, honest." And now, his gaze softened. "I think you've earned the chance to see a side of the world you've never imagined." I stared at him, dumbfounded. The man whose farm I had been clearing, whose tools I had been lifting under the sun, whose quiet presence had been a constant in my exhausting, lonely life, he was a billionaire. Not flamboyant, not flashy, just quietly, profoundly wealthy. My brain scrambled to reconcile the image of the old, stoic man with the revelation he had just given me. For a moment, I felt dizzy, like the floor might tilt under my feet. And yet the thought that immediately struck me wasn't wonder, it was opportunity. A chance. A door I never knew existed had just opened. Henry continued, voice gentler now. I don't offer this lightly. I've watched you, Haley, seen how hard you work, how much you carry. I believe in giving people a chance who deserve it. If you're willing, I want you to help me manage some properties. Real responsibility. Pay will be steady, and I think you'll find purpose in it. The word purpose struck me harder than anything else. After years of running from shift to shift, scraping by to cover bills and obligations left by parents who had vanished, I hadn't even known what I was searching for. And here it was, handed to me with clarity and trust, not charity. I nodded slowly, trying to steady the rush of emotion. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything yet. Just think about it. Recover first. Then we'll talk details. But know this, he paused, eyes serious. I see you. I see everything you've done. And I respect it. The room was quiet for a long moment. I could hear my own breath, the faint hum of machines, and the distant footsteps of nurses in the hall. It felt surreal, like stepping through a door into a world I had never imagined, a world that could reshape everything I thought I knew about life, responsibility, and worth. After leaving the hospital that day, I felt the strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. My body was sore, my hands raw from weeks of labor, and my mind still rattled from the shock of Henry's collapse and revelation. Yet, beneath it all, a spark ignited. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I could thrive, and perhaps, finally, reclaim a life that wasn't defined by endless shifts, unpaid bills, or the weight of those who had abandoned me. That night, lying awake in the quiet of my small apartment, I replayed the events over and over. Every detail. The collapse, the panic, the phone calls, Henry's hoarse words, his quiet acknowledgement of my efforts, was etched in my memory. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, I realized something vital. Life could shift in an instant. The ground could collapse beneath you, people you counted on could fail, and yet, hidden within that chaos, new opportunities, unexpected, profound, could emerge. Henry's collapse had changed everything. It had reminded me that life was fragile, that trust was rare, and that perseverance didn't go unnoticed. Most importantly, it had opened a door I never expected, showing me that even after years of endless labor and abandonment, the chance to step into a different life, one with purpose and respect, was possible. And with that thought, exhaustion finally gave way to a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in years. The days following Henry's collapse were a strange mix of exhaustion, elation, and uneasy anticipation. I had begun to see a path forward, one that promised recognition, stability, and a chance to reclaim some dignity after years of toil. Yet, as I settled into this tentative hope, life reminded me that the past doesn't stay buried. It has a way of knocking, of showing up unannounced, and forcing you to confront it whether you are ready or not. It started with a phone call. The ringtone startled me, not because I didn't expect calls, but because it was a number I hadn't seen in years, my mother's. My hand shook slightly as I answered, unsure whether to greet with anger, fear, or cautious curiosity. Haley, her voice said, soft and unfamiliar. It's Mom. I froze, gripping the phone tightly. The years of silence between us stretched like an invisible wall. So many nights I had imagined this call, what she might say, how she might explain, whether she would apologize, or whether I would scream at her instead. But nothing could prepare me for the hesitancy in her tone, the fragile tremor that made her sound smaller than I remembered. What do you want? I asked carefully, keeping my voice steady, though my heart pounded. I need to talk to you, she whispered. I know we left everything. I know I hurt you, Haley, and I'm sorry. Please, can we meet? I swallowed hard, memories flooding back. The night they vanished, the bills, the loneliness, the exhaustion of surviving on 4 jobs just to keep the roof over my head. My body tensed, every nerve on edge. The anger I had buried for years now bubbling to the surface. I don't know if I can. I said, finally, you left me. You left me with nothing, Mom. I know, she admitted. I can't take that back. But I'm asking for a chance. Please. I hung up before she could respond, my mind a swirl of emotions. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to run. And yet, beneath it all, there was a small, stubborn curiosity. Why now? Why after all these years? The ghosts of my past had arrived, uninvited, demanding a reckoning I hadn't prepared for. The next day, I found myself standing at the edge of my parents' old neighborhood, the familiar houses bringing a strange sense of nostalgia and unease. My parents' old house looked smaller than I remembered, almost fragile, like it had been waiting for me to return and confront it. The door creaked when I knocked, and my mother's familiar silhouette appeared, hesitant, her eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and relief. Haley, she started, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said firmly. Just sit. We sat in the old living room, the furniture unchanged, dust motes floating lazily in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Silence stretched between us, heavy and unspoken, until she finally spoke again. We didn't know how to tell you. Your father and we made mistakes. Big ones. We thought we were protecting you by handling things ourselves. But we were wrong. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to demand every explanation, every apology, every ounce of accountability. But the years of exhaustion, the relentless labor, the relentless survival, it all combined into a simmering calm that allowed me to listen, if only partially, without losing myself. You abandoned me, I said, finally, my voice low but steady. You left me to pay bills you swore you'd handle. I worked 4 jobs, Mom. 4. And you? I know, she interrupted, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. I know. We were greedy. We thought we could get lucky. And then we let fear rule us. We didn't know how to face you. Haley, we didn't know how to be honest. The words stung, but what stung more was the familiarity of the excuses, the way they danced around responsibility without ever fully embracing it. My chest tightened as I realized this wasn't just about money or bills or abandonment. It was about trust, and trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. I don't know if I can forgive you. I admitted. I don't know if I even want to. She nodded, silently acknowledging the truth in my words. I understand. I only hoped you might hear me out. Over the next few weeks, the ghosts of my past kept appearing in unexpected ways. Letters arrived in my mailbox, notes tucked between bills, reminders of debts I had already paid, photographs from my childhood slipped under my door. Each one carried a mix of nostalgia, guilt, and a haunting sense of unresolved history. I read them, crumpled them, sometimes left them unopened, but always felt their pull. One evening, I was walking home from the diner, exhausted, when I noticed a car parked outside my apartment. A familiar face appeared at the window. It was my father, looking older, frielier, yet unmistakably him. He waved, a tentative gesture, and for a moment, the weight of years pressed down on me. I wanted to turn away, to pretend I hadn't seen him, to continue surviving without facing the reminders of what they had done. But something in me stirred, a mixture of anger, curiosity, and the faintest hope for closure. I opened the door cautiously. "What are you doing here?" I asked. I I came to explain, he said, his voice shaking. We made choices, terrible ones. We thought we were protecting you. Haley, but we were wrong. I know we hurt you. I know we abandoned you. But I wanted to try to make it right. His words hit me differently than my mother's. They were less rehearsed, more raw. But the emotional weight of his absence, the years of silent struggle I had endured, made my chest ache. I wanted to tell him everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the loneliness, the weight of surviving alone. But the words stuck somewhere between my throat and my ribs. Instead, I sat down, letting him speak. He talked for hours about decisions made under pressure, about the fear of failing, about the shame of leaving me. The more he spoke, the more I realized the complexity of human failure. They hadn't been perfect, and they hadn't been cruel in the way I imagined. They had been flawed, selfish, and scared. But their flaws had collided with my life in a way that left scars deeper than I had ever acknowledged. Then came the unexpected twist. One afternoon, while going through an old box of letters, I found a small envelope marked with my name in my father's handwriting. Inside was a note, trembling and barely legible. Haley, I hope one day you can understand why we left. We made mistakes. We loved you in the only way we knew how, and we failed. Please, live your life, even if we aren't part of it. The note struck a chord deep within me. I had spent years carrying anger, resentment, and betrayal like armor, believing that protecting myself meant never forgiving. Yet, holding this fragile paper in my hands, I realized that life had a way of forcing reflection, of demanding that you confront the ghosts rather than continue fleeing. The past didn't vanish. It shaped me. It haunted me, yes, but it also gave me perspective. I began to see the connections between my relentless work ethic, my empathy for others, and the resilience I had developed. My parents' mistakes, while painful, had forced me to grow in ways they could never have provided. I was stronger, sharper, and more determined because of what I endured. Yet, forgiveness was not immediate. There were nights I screamed into pillows, imagining the life I could have had, the nights of rest, the ease of childhood I never experienced. There were days I wished they had never returned, that the ghosts would vanish again. But each confrontation, each conversation, each hesitant reconciliation chipped away at the walls I had built, layer by layer. Eventually, I found a balance, a fragile, imperfect acceptance. I didn't forget the past. I didn't erase the pain. But I began to see my parents not just as the architects of my suffering, but as flawed humans navigating their own fears. The ghosts from my past were no longer entirely enemies. They became reminders of endurance, of lessons hard learned, and of the value of confronting pain rather than avoiding it. And in that confrontation, I began to reclaim my life, not as a victim, not as a worker buried under endless shifts, but as a woman capable of setting boundaries, embracing strength, and understanding that even when the ghosts knock, you can choose how to respond. That was the collapse I hadn't expected. Not Henry's collapse, not my parents' disappearance, but the emotional collapse of my own defenses. And when I finally looked up from the remnants of the past, I realized that for the first time in years, I was truly standing on my own terms. The morning sun fell gently through my apartment window, casting a warm glow over the cluttered living room. It was a quiet morning, rare in my life, and for the first time in years, I had no immediate obligations, no deadlines, no shifts, no urgent phone calls demanding my attention. The emptiness was both comforting and unnerving, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you could either fall or leap. I sat at the edge of my bed, feet dangling over the side, and allowed myself to feel the stillness. For so long, my life had been consumed by effort, by survival, by constant motion to outrun the shadows of abandonment and exhaustion. The past weeks, the confrontations with my parents, Henry's collapse, the unexpected offers of responsibility. All of it had created a swirling storm inside me. And now, with nothing demanding my immediate response, I realized something profound. I had a choice. I could continue to carry the weight of anger, resentment, and betrayal, or I could let it go. I breathed deeply, letting the air fill my lungs, imagining it washing through the knots of tension in my shoulders and chest. Choosing peace, I decided, wasn't a sign of weakness. It wasn't pretending the pain hadn't existed. It was an acknowledgement that I had survived, that I had endured far more than most could imagine, and that clinging to the hurt would only keep me chained to a past I no longer needed to inhabit. The first step was simple, though far from easy. I picked up my phone and sent a message to my mother. "I'm ready to talk. Not to forgive yet, but to understand." Her reply came almost immediately, brief but trembling. "Thank you, Haley. I'll be there in an hour." I hung up and walked to the kitchen, making myself a cup of tea. The aroma of chamomile filled the room, gentle and grounding, and I allowed myself a small smile. Even small rituals, simple acts of self-care, felt revolutionary after years of surviving at breakneck speed. I set the cup on the table and stared out the window, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. Birds hopped along fences, neighbors walked dogs, the familiar sounds of a quiet Saturday morning weaving together a comforting backdrop. When my mother arrived, I opened the door, feeling a flutter of anxiety I hadn't expected. She looked older than I remembered, her hair streaked with silver, her hands shaking slightly as she extended them toward me. "Haley," she whispered, voice breaking. "Thank you for this." I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. We sat together in the living room, the sun spilling across the floorboards, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy, it was contemplative, reflective. It felt like the calm before a storm, though I sensed this storm would be one of reconciliation rather than destruction. "I want you to know," she began carefully, "that I have thought about you every day since we left. Every single day. And I hate that it took so long for me to face you, to face what we did." I listened, feeling the familiar mix of anger and curiosity stirring inside me. The words were sincere, yes, but they carried the weight of years I had spent rebuilding my life without them. I wanted to interject, to ask questions that had piled up over decades, but I stayed silent, letting her speak. Over the next hour, she shared fragments of their story, the fear, the financial pressures, the panic that had driven them to leave rather than explain. She spoke of regret, of longing, of the deep awareness that they had abandoned me in the worst possible way. With every word, I felt a strange combination of pain and relief. Pain, because of what had been lost. Relief, because for the first time, the truths I had imagined were being spoken aloud. When she finished, I took a deep breath. "Mom," I said slowly, "I don't know if I can forgive everything. Not yet. But I also don't want to carry this hate anymore. I've spent so many years working, surviving, barely sleeping. I don't want to spend another moment carrying you in my anger." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "I understand, Haley. I don't expect it. I hope we can start again, slowly." And that was the moment it struck me peace wasn't about absolving them of the pain they caused. It wasn't about pretending the past didn't exist. It was about choosing my own freedom, choosing not to let resentment dominate my life, choosing to reclaim my energy, my clarity, and my joy. The choice didn't end with my mother. Over the next few weeks, I confronted other ghosts from my past, the debts left unpaid, the friends who had drifted away, even the neighbors who had witnessed my struggles silently. I wrote letters, made calls, and sometimes visited in person. I didn't expect forgiveness or reconciliation everywhere. Some doors remained closed, and some voices remained silent. But each encounter taught me more about resilience, about the strength it takes to step out of the shadow of hurt and into the light of personal agency. One afternoon, I visited the diner where I had worked for so many years. Mary, the cook, was wiping down counters, her usual cheerful demeanor unchanged despite the years. I walked up to her, heart pounding. "Mary," I said softly, I just wanted to thank you for all those years, for noticing, for being kind, for everything." She looked at me, surprised, then smiled warmly. "Haley, you didn't have to thank me. You've always been remarkable, even when you didn't see it yourself." Her words struck me with quiet intensity, recognition from someone who had watched me labor through exhaustion without complaint, someone who had silently observed my survival. This was another piece of my peace. It was a reminder that I didn't need validation from everyone, just acknowledgement of my own worth. Choosing peace also meant redefining my relationship with work. The 4 jobs that had once consumed my life were no longer a measure of survival. They became a measure of discipline, resilience, and self-reliance. I still worked hard, yes, but now with intention. I set boundaries. I took breaks. I allowed myself moments of joy, however fleeting, and gradually the constant tension in my body began to loosen. Even Henry's offer of responsibility became a symbol of this new chapter. I accepted his guidance and mentorship, not out of obligation or fear, but because I recognized the opportunity for growth, for stability, and for self-actualization. For the first time in my life, I was working not just to survive, but to thrive. Yet peace wasn't always easy. Some days, the old resentment would surface, unbidden, like a shadow flickering across a sunlit room. I would catch myself replaying years of abandonment, imagining conversations that never happened, feeling the sting of lost time. And in those moments, I made a conscious choice to breathe, to release, and to focus on the present. To remind myself that peace wasn't the absence of pain, it was the decision to live fully despite it. I also learned to embrace solitude differently. In the quiet of my apartment, I discovered the value of being alone without being lonely. I spent afternoons reading, journaling, and tending to small projects around the house. I allowed myself to laugh freely at silly things, to cry without shame, and to savor the ordinary pleasures I had long ignored. The smell of coffee in the morning, the feel of sun on my face, the gentle rhythm of my own heartbeat. One evening, as the sky blushed with the colors of sunset, I sat on my porch and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The years of work, the collapses, the confrontations with the past, they had all been stepping stones, though I hadn't realized it at the time. The ghosts had knocked, yes, but instead of allowing them to define me, I had chosen to face them, to listen, to learn, and ultimately to release their hold over my life. I whispered to the wind, almost as if speaking to myself, "I am free. I am enough. I am done carrying what isn't mine to bear." And for the first time in a long while, I truly believed it. Later that night, my mother called. "Haley, I just wanted to hear your voice," she said softly. I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. "I'm okay, Mom. Really okay. I've chosen peace." And in that choice, I realized something powerful. Peace isn't something others grant you. It isn't found in apologies or material security. It is a decision, an action, a commitment to prioritize your own well-being, even in the face of past trauma. It is standing tall amidst the echoes of what hurt you and declaring with clarity and courage that you will no longer be defined by it. I poured myself another cup of tea, feeling the heat seep into my hands, and looked out the window at the quiet neighborhood. The world continued on its usual rhythms, cars humming along the streets, children laughing somewhere in the distance, neighbors tending gardens. But for me, the world felt different. It was no longer a place of endless struggle. It was a canvas, vast and open, where I could live intentionally with purpose and with heart. And that, I realized, was the ultimate gift of choosing peace over pain. Not forgetting, not pretending, not erasing the past, but rising above it, embracing the present, and stepping into a future defined not by what others had done to me, but by what I chose to do for myself. For the first time in years, I slept that night with a sense of calm that wasn't borrowed, forced, or fleeting. I slept knowing I had faced my ghosts, made my choices, and claimed my life on my own terms. The day I chose peace over pain became a landmark, a pivot from survival to life fully lived, a testament to resilience, courage, and the quiet power of a human heart that refuses to be broken beyond repair. As I sit here now, in the quiet of my own home, the weight of years pressing less heavily on my shoulders, I can finally see the journey for what it truly was, not just a series of hardships, betrayals, and endless toil, but a crucible that shaped me into someone I might never have become otherwise. I think back to the night my parents vanished, leaving me alone to navigate a world that suddenly felt impossibly harsh. And I remember the fear, the anger, and the exhaustion that consumed me for so long. And yet, I also see how those moments of abandonment forced me to find strength I didn't know I had, resilience that carried me through 4 grueling jobs, and determination that kept me moving even when every bone in my body ached with fatigue and despair. Each collapse, each confrontation with the past, each painful lesson was a step toward discovering the kind of person I could be when I refused to let bitterness define me. The ghosts of my past, my parents' mistakes, the years of being left to fend for myself, the memories I tried to bury, still linger in the corners of my mind. But they no longer haunt me in the way they once did. Instead, they serve as reminders of how far I've come, of the choices I've made to prioritize myself, to stand tall even when the world seemed determined to knock me down. I have learned that peace is not given, it is chosen. It is a deliberate act of courage, a conscious decision to let go of the pain that threatens to consume us, and a commitment to reclaim the life that is rightfully ours. Choosing peace does not erase the scars, but it softens them, allowing room for growth, for love, for moments of quiet joy I once believed were out of reach. Looking at Henry, my mentor and friend, I see the reflection of what it means to be valued for who you are, not just for what you can do or what you endure. And looking at my parents, I recognize that while forgiveness is a slow and imperfect process, the act of opening myself to understanding, even cautiously, has released a freedom I never thought possible. The years of struggle, the nights of tears, the relentless work, they were never wasted. They taught me perseverance, empathy, and the unshakable truth that my worth is not tied to what others give me, but to the strength I cultivate within myself. So now, I move forward not with bitterness or regret, but with intention. I move forward knowing that life will always have its unexpected turns, that people will falter, and that circumstances can change in an instant. Yet I am no longer afraid to face them, because I have learned that the ultimate power lies not in controlling the world, but in controlling how I respond to it. I am free, I am whole, and I am committed to living a life defined by courage, compassion, and the quiet, steady strength that comes from choosing peace over pain. And in that choice, I have finally found a home within myself, a place where past and present coexist, not as enemies, but as teachers guiding me toward the future I was always meant to claim.